Hi, thanks for joining. Please make sure you subscribe to follow us on all the various platforms here on the podcast, as well as on YouTube. The stuff we write on Substack, as well as quick takes on Instagram and on Threads. If you're enjoying what we're putting out there, please make sure you're sharing with all your friends and family. And if you have questions or comments about the stuff we're putting out there, please make sure you leave them in comments to us. We'd be more than happy to cover them in future talks. So we're in the school year. We're trying to learn new things. We're trying to gain new insights. We're trying to grow our brains. We're trying to develop stronger brains, trying to develop smarter brains. Or we are trying to get what has been lost as we've aged back. And in order to do this, we get bombarded with a whole host of advertisements about various supplements that we can use that's going to help make us smarter, help focus, help our brain work. But how truthful are these advertisements as it relates to the ability to learn, the ability to stay focused, the ability to have stronger, have smarter brains? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy.
Just as with everything else in the world of health and in the world of performance, we are given or sold a whole host of various products, typically dietary supplements, that are meant to somehow cause physiological adaptations, physiological changes that are going to lead to better performance. One such type of dietary supplements that are out there that are meant to or are sold to cause modifications, cause adaptations, are those things that are meant to lead to brain focus. There are sold under a host of various names. We've seen a lot of the pitches, we've seen a lot of the advertisements. Let's take a quick moment here to listen to a few of those advertisements that are out there, and then let's talk about what are the advertisements, what are they trying to sell, what is the truth in what the supplements have to offer, and then let's take a look at what other things in our lifestyle might we be able to do in order to encourage stronger brains, smarter brains. And we'll start with the advertisement for Focus Factor.
Baby's name is
Stephen Wright. It's Stephen with the PH.
Address is
531 Sage Street, that's just next to City Hall.
Where are my keys? My glasses?
Head. Wait, how are you doing this? Focus Factor.
Focus Factor has been clinically shown to improve memory, concentration, and focus. It improves verbal learning and short-term memory by 44%. So get your Einstein on.
Yo! Wow, Dad's on it too.
Focus Factor.
And then we have Nariva.
Want to do more for your brain? Unlike ordinary memory supplements, Nariva Plus fuels 6 indicators of brain health. Memory, focus, accuracy, learning, concentration, and reasoning. Nariva, do more for your brain.
And for those of you that listen to other podcasts out there, you might have heard advertisements for this next supplement. It's also been seen in a lot of the streaming stuff recently, particularly for student focuses. And so let's go ahead and let's take a look at Alpha Brain, or listen to Alpha Brain, I should say.
This is Alpha Brain. This is Lucas.
No, you're cheating.
He just needs to cut out. All right,
No, you get good. No,
cut
you
out
get good.
distractions. He could use some focus.
No, you get good. No,
This is
you
what
get-
Alpha Brain can do. If you've got a lot going on or need to think clearly, we've got an Alpha Brain product that's got your back. It's not hard to get. I mean, you know how to shop.
And so if we think about what's being pitched, what's being sold within these advertisements and within the idea about the need or necessity for dietary supplements, is the fact that nutrition and nutritional awareness and nutritional load, even though a lot of people don't think about nutrition based off of nutrient balance, the fact that nutrition and nutrient load, nutrient balance is going to be important in terms of the ability to have proper neuronal functions. The problem is that what are we actually looking at? What are the supplements actually adding to what we happen to have? And it's not just these supplements. We also have a whole host of pitches, a whole host of ideas about take these natural ingredients that are supposed to somehow provide additional resources to the brain in order to allow us to focus, in order to allow us to learn. Things like omega-3 fatty acids, things like creatine, things like taurine, things like theanine, things like choline, things like niacin and B vitamins, things like vitamin D, things like caffeine and theobromine. The substances we get from green tea extracts that are supposed to provide additional benefits. Things like ginseng, things like magnesium. And more recent, more popular things in terms of popular ideas about things that we need, such as ashwagandha, are all things that are being pitched as what we need in terms of nutrition and nutrient supplementation in order to have quote unquote stronger brains or in order to have quote unquote smarter brains, all based on what those specific types of dietary supplements might be able to offer as it relates to the ability to allow the brain to focus. And that's the key thing here. What they're principally selling is the idea that these supplements are going to somehow allow for increased focus. And by increasing focus, they're going to allow for increase in brain activity. And by increasing brain activity, you're going to increase the action and activity within the brain that's going to make the brain stronger and going to make the brain smarter. If you look at the actual dietary supplements, the focus factor or the alpha brain or any of the other supplements that are out there based off of the name brand supplements we might be able to pick up at the stores, not the individual nutrients. We'll talk about the individual nutrients here in a second. All of them are based on the same relative thing in terms of what it's offering, which is a large dose of various types of vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, as well as a host of the vitamin Bs, along with choline, along with magnesium, along with other types of electrolytes and other types of ions that we might need, along with blends of, and these are all proprietary blends, of various types of amino acid complexes. That's what you're buying when you buy these supplements. The only way that those supplements would do any good for me is if I happen to be short in any of those nutrients at the time I'm taking the supplements. Otherwise, they're not going to provide what is being indicated as being provided. If we start looking at some of the other ingredients, some of the other factors that might be at play in terms of the nutrients that are being consumed that might have purported benefits, what we're looking at is supplements that either act as antioxidants, act as anti-adenosine signals, or act in a way that's going to supplement energetic pathways within the neurons and within the body itself. So if we start taking a look at, let's start with like the omega-3 fatty acids, ignoring the vitamins and those things right now. The omega-3 fatty acids, the DHA, the EPA, the ALA, those essential fatty acids are necessary in order to build and maintain a lot of the membranes in the body, as well as provide resources to build hormones that are necessary in order to regulate inflammation processes. We do have evidence to support that the consumption of omega-3 fatty acids is important for the reduction and reduced risk for cognitive decline, reduction and reduced risk for the development of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, as well as other neurodegenerative diseases. The problem is we should not be over-consuming the omega-3s or the omega-6s in terms of the fatty acids. There is a tight window of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that we should be consuming. Most of us will consume enough if we are eating rainbows within our diet, particularly if we're eating rainbows within our diet that includes some of the fish, some of the quote-unquote healthy meats. A lot of the vegetarian diets will have omega-3s within them. They also have omega-6s within them. The problem is that we want to make sure that our omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids stay within a ratio of 6:1 in terms of omega-6s to omega-3s without over-consuming those omega-6s and omega-3s. We want to have between 2 and 3 grams per day of omega-3s. We want to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 or so grams of omega-6s in a day. And that balance is going to make sure that we get proper maintenance of our cell membranes, proper maintenance of our inflammatory signals due to the need and necessity of those fatty acids in the production of those molecules in the body. We don't need exorbitant amounts. If we start looking at, okay, so go take like the fish oil supplements, or if we look at a lot of the dietary supplements that are there, like the focus factors, the alpha brains, those types of dietary supplements, they are going to provide in excess of what is necessary for dietary maintenance. We don't need excessive amounts. The other thing we have to worry about in terms of the dietary supplements is that is the supplement itself, is what we're ingesting biologically available to the body, or do we have to have secondary processes taking place that's going to reduce the viability of that molecule coming into the body? If we start looking at substances like creatine and substances like taurine and taurine are going to be necessary for normal neurological metabolism. Creatine we usually think about in terms of muscle action and muscle activity. The reason why I think about in terms of muscle action and muscle activity is because of what creatine does in terms of energy pathways. And creatine is involved with energy pathways in terms of getting the energy molecule back to the cell without causing excessive amounts of oxidative stress within the cell. It's a very rapidly utilized amino acid. It's a rapidly utilized amino acid that stabilizes phosphate movement within the cells that allows for the regeneration of the energy molecule ATP, adenosine triphosphate. For individuals who have neurological decline, for individuals that have suffered from traumatic brain injury, concussions, subconcussive injuries, head trauma, supplementation with creatine has been shown to slow the rate of decline following injury, as well as improve the rate of recovery from the injury. For the neurodegenerative disease, creatine supplementation has been shown to slow the rate of decline. Most individuals who eat meat consume enough creatine in a day in order to offset what is being lost through normal metabolic process. For those individuals with neurological disorders, for those individuals with traumatic brain injury, supplementing at a rate of 3 to 5 grams per day has benefit. The general recommendation is supplementing at 0.3 grams per kilogram of body mass, which for the quote unquote typical person is somewhere between 20 and 30 grams of creatine for a 5 to 7 day period, followed by that 3 to 5 grams of additional creatine per day thereafter. There's been indications that it leads to increase in creatine storage within some of the tissues, which includes the neurons, which allows for an increase in mitochondrial functions within the neurons, which allows for a better energetic pathway within the neurons. Taurine is another amino acid that we need to get from our diet. Taurine supplementation is usually associated with a lot of the weight loss stuff, mainly because it's associated with increased aerobic metabolism, simply because it's an amino acid that is going to be involved in regulating aerobic and mitochondrial functions, which is why the neurons need it, because the neurons are going to be utilizing a lot more aerobic metabolism than what we see in other tissues. If we start looking at like niacin and the B vitamins, what we're really looking at is we're looking at what is necessary for niacin, for folate, for a lot of the B vitamins in terms of the use in production of neurotransmitters. The same with choline. So when we start looking at these B vitamins, we start looking at niacin, we start looking at folate, we start looking at choline. What we're really looking at is we're looking at molecules that are necessary in order to produce neurotransmitters. And without those neurotransmitters, we're not going to have normal neurological functions. Same thing with a lot of the essential and non-essential amino acids, making sure that we have the correct amount of protein, the correct amount of amino acids, and the completeness of proteins and the completeness of amino acids within our diet so that we're able to meet the needs that we have for the use of those amino acids within the body. A lot of the other things that we're going to see within some of these dietary supplements are going to be antioxidants, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin C, in terms of what we get from the supplements. The idea behind the antioxidants is to help control oxidative stress within the neurons. And by controlling oxidative stress within the neurons, it's going to allow for proper neuronal functions. And that's the whole key here in terms of the actions with the last bit of supplements we're going to talk about. It's about proper neuron functions. And so we start looking at the extracts from green tea. If we start looking at theobromine, theophylline, and caffeine, the stimulants that we get from coffee, caffeine, and from tea, theobromine, theophylline, and to a lesser extent, caffeine. All of those are monoamine derived molecules. They look like neurotransmitters, they look like hormones that we think about as being activators. But at the same time, they have a very similar chemical concept, very similar chemical structure to adenine, to adenosine. And adenosine is a molecule that comes about, that gets derived within the body when we overutilize our ATP cycles, when we overutilize the need for ATP within the body, where as a byproduct, by stripping phosphates off of the adenosine triphosphate, making adenosine diphosphate, making adenosine monophosphate, and then making an adenosine in the attempt to get ATP back to the cell, the adenosine starts to go into circulation, and the adenosine signals the neurons and signals the rest of the tissues to slow down activity because we need to recover from the excessive amount of energy utilization, the excessive amount of metabolism taking place. Caffeine, theophylline, theobromine are all going to be blocking that adenosine receptor response. By blocking the adenosine receptor response, it blocks the slowdown that can take place. And by blocking the slowdown that can take place, what it does is it allows the neurons to function normally as opposed to slowing down. And because they're functioning normally instead of slowing down, even though we've spent all day studying, even though we are old and gray and tired and are stressed out, by blocking the adenosine, we're able to get the neurons to function correctly. And we're able to get the neurons to function correctly, we now have these periods of high mental activity and high mental acuity that makes us feel like we have greater amounts of focus, we have greater amounts of memory, we have greater amounts of mental resolve and mental ability. But the reason why we feel that way is because instead of slowing down, we're staying normal. Our rate of use stays normal. That's what the caffeine, that's what the theophylline, that's what the theobromine does by blocking the adenosine from activating, or I should say deactivating, the neurons in the brain. So by adding those supplements, by adding those molecules, whether it's through consumption of tea, consumption of coffee, or taking one of these pills, one of these dietary supplements that are expressly being sold as a means to increase brain activity, to make the brain stronger, to make the brain smarter, that's what we're doing. We're making the neurons function normally. We're not making the neurons function better. And that's where we get a misconception about what does that supplement, what does that added molecule actually do? And what it's doing is it's acting like a secondary hormone. It's acting like a secondary neurotransmitter that's going to allow the neurons to function the way that neurons are supposed to function. It's not speeding them up. It's not making them any better. It's just allowing them to function the way they're supposed to function. That idea about functioning the way they're supposed to function, the idea about oxidative stress, the idea about controlling oxidative stress, the ability to control the rate of slowdown, takes us into other types of supplements that are out there that are basically being sold as a supplement that is meant to reduce the level of stress that is being felt. What those chemicals in those other supplements that are out there, the ashwagandha, the maca, even the green tea extracts, what they are attempting to do is they're attempting to reduce stress signals. And by reducing stress signals, it's reducing the level of stress hormones. And by reducing the level of stress hormones, it's allowing the growth factors to come into play. And by allowing the growth factors to come into play, it allows for the neurons to have hypertrophy, to have growth responses to use. When we have high amounts of stress, the neurons feel that same level of high amounts of stress due to the high level of circulation of stress hormones and stress signals, both within the brain as well as within the body. Those stress signals block the growth signals that can normally come about due to increased neurological activity, increased neuron activity, increased brain activity. When we're using our brain, the neurons are going to start to branch out at the synapses, at the little connection points between the neurons. Those connection points, as we start using them more often, become bigger and become more embedded and intertwined within each other, making those connections stronger. The stronger and the bigger the connections are, the better the brain is working and the better my memory and recall happen to be, particularly when those connection points are being strengthened, made bigger, made stronger within the limbic system and within the prefrontal cortex. That's allowing me to have memory and recall if I happen to be a student trying to get a bigger, stronger brain in order to remember what I'm studying as it comes to an assessment, or remember what I'm learning so that I'm able to apply it later on in my professional career. Or if I happen to be old and gray, it's allowing me to keep the connections that were slowly being lost due to disuse. By allowing the brain to have these various levels of connections and to have an increase in the various levels of connections taking place, what it's going to do is it's going to strengthen the brain. It's going to increase the rate at which signals are being passed around the brain and signals that are being passed from the brain out to the rest of the body. That's going to allow me to have better rates of recovery, better rates of reactions, better ability to coordinate and control body movements, simply because I'm able to reduce the level of stress. There's a sequence of events that I go through when I teach the stress response. It's in a separate secondary podcast. It's in a secondary YouTube video that looks at what is the responses that we see to stress. And within the brain, the stress response that we see is a hyperactivity within the amygdala and a hypoactivity within the hippocampus. The hyperactivity, the higher amounts of activity within the amygdala, triggers within the hypothalamus an increased rate of fight or flight response. That means that we are geared up to overreact to every type of stimulus. That means that we're paying attention to everything, but we're not really paying attention to anything. We're aware of all the stimulus around us, but we can't focus on any particular stimulus as a stimulus. We can't focus on one particular aspect of what we need to do because we're overstressed. And because we're overstressed, the amygdala activity increases. And when the amygdala activity increases, the fight or flight responses go sky high. And it triggers additional fear responsing, additional alert responsing that makes my responses exaggerated. That doesn't allow me to focus on what I need to focus on. That doesn't allow me to recall the information to perform the activity that I need to perform. The opposite happens when I don't have high amounts of stress, but the correct amount of arousal, the correct amount of awareness to what's going on. When the stress level is correct for the situation, instead of having hyperactivity in the amygdala, I start having hyperactivity, higher amounts of activity within the hippocampus, and that higher amounts of activity within the hippocampus is going to be slowing down the rate by which the amygdala is triggering the hypothalamus to cause fight or flight responses to everything that's going on around me. What that's going to allow me to do is to focus on the things that I have to be aware of, the things in particular that I have to remember. It's going to allow me to increase my rate of recall. It's going to allow me to increase the amount of factual information that I remember. When I am overstressed, when I have too much inflammation signals taking place, when I have too much stress signals taking place, the ability for me to factually recall something drops. A lot of demential issues that arise will arise because of irregular stress responses that if we do have a supplement that helps us with controlling that stress response, that inflammation response, can help with offsetting some of the neurodegenerative diseases. If I'm a student, if I'm able to control the amount of stress that I'm placing on myself, or ignore the amount of coercive stress that the instructor, the professor, the teacher is placing on me, based off of, is the professor, teacher, instructor having me focus on learning, or is that professor, teacher, instructor having me focus on earning points? If the focus is on earning points, I have an excessive amount of stress of coercion in order to get the material. Whereas if the focus is on learning, the amount of stress that's there drops because there's not a coercive event, there's not a coercive force making me have to do things. I'm selecting to do things. And when I select to do things, the amount of psychological cognitive stress, which is going to cause the same type of cellular signals as physiological stress, starts to drop. And when it starts to drop, I'm able to have better focus, better memory, better recall, better overall mental performance, independent of taking any of these supplements. So the idea behind these supplements is to allow for the neurons to function correctly, either by allowing for proper energetics, allow for controlling of ROS accumulation or oxidative stress, reduction of inflammatory or stress signals, so that the neuron is able to function correctly. And if the neuron is able to function correctly, the brain will function correctly. That is kind of their selling point behind what's going on in these supplements. But here's the thing. The dietary supplements is just one aspect of all of the health stuff, all of the lifestyle stuff that we can do that's going to help regulate. Oxidative stress is going to help regulate. Growth factors is going to help regulate my ability to respond, my ability to maintain my health, the ability to maintain all of the tissues and allow those tissues to grow. One of the things that most of these dietary supplements are ignoring is the other aspect of lifestyle outside of nutrition that we can control, that has been shown to have a more powerful response within the neurons as it relates to the ability to have the neurons grow, the ability to encourage learning, and that is physical activity. And the reason why physical activity is as important, if not more important, than taking these supplements or having additional amounts of the nutrients in my diet is that physical activity, particularly the correct patterned physical activity, the correct patterned exercise, it's going to stimulate growth factors. Various types of growth factors, everything from growth hormone to the androgens, to the brain-derived growth factors, to the brain-derived neuro growth factors, to a reduction in inflammatory signals, to a reduction in cortisol, that's going to allow for growth to take place. And the reason why we have growth to take place with the neurons is because it's going to allow for those stronger connections to occur. But what it's also going to do is also going to allow for the axons, that part of the neuron that sends the signals. It's going to allow for that axon to grow. Larger axons are able to send signals faster. More active neurons will have more synapses, more connections with other neurons. And so we're going to have a bigger axon, a bigger transmission cord, plus more connection points coming off of that transmission cord. Those things combined with the growth signals within the brain, which is going to trigger new neurons to be developed, is going to allow for an increase in the mass of the brain. It's going to allow for an increase in the connection and connectivity of the brain. It's going to lead to a reduction in the inflammation within the brain. That's going to allow for the brain to become stronger. And when the brain becomes stronger, we become smarter. It's not necessarily about taking these various supplements that may allow for the neurons to function better if we happen to be in deficit for those supplements or for those nutrients that are found in the supplements in terms of neuronal physiology, in terms of how the neuron functions. Exercise will do this independent of any type of nutrient balance issues that we might have. It's going to help reduce stress levels. It's going to help reduce oxidative stress. It's going to help increase the amount of antioxidants that we are naturally producing in our body. It's going to trigger growth factors. We did a long talk on how exercise is important in school for learning. We've done a long talk on how exercise is important in terms of preventing neurodegenerative disease. And we've done a long talk in terms of how exercise is important for adults and for college-age students for learning in the kind of guise that exercise is going to lead to growth, and growth is going to lead to that stronger neuron connection. It's that whole kind of combined symbiotic relationship between growth throughout the body. Now, if we start looking at other types of signals that can come into play that might have benefit from these supplements, some of that stress that we might have that we cannot completely control with exercise, we may need some of that supplement. If we are excessively active, if we are recovering from brain injuries, if we are athletes that have contact in our sport, taking additional creatine is important. If we are following a vegetarian diet, taking supplemental creatine is important. If we are following a vegetarian diet, taking a supplemental taurine is important. Supplemental choline is important. If we're following a vegetarian diet, making sure that we're getting complete proteins within our diet is important. But just because those things are important doesn't mean that we make up for what we lack in our diet by taking supplements. The supplements are there to supplement our normal nutrient balance. As long as we're making our nutrient balance, we should be perfectly fine. I highly recommend going and listening to the other talks or watching the other videos, or the YouTube videos on the aspects of how exercise is important in terms of neuronal growth, is important in terms of regulating neurodegenerative diseases, that combined with what we just mentioned in terms of the dietary supplements and what we need in terms of nutrition and nutrient balance. Thanks for listening. Hope you got a little bit out of this talk as it relates to the dietary supplements that are purported to have benefit in terms of brain functions and brain health. If you like what we're putting out there, please make sure you give us that 5-star rating, give us that big thumbs up, sharing what we're putting out there with all of your friends and family. Make sure you're following us on all the various platforms, the podcast, on YouTube, the written stuff in Substack, as well as the quick takes on Threads and on Instagram. All the links are available in the descriptions here on the podcast, as well as on the bios that are on the various platforms that we're publishing on. If you have questions, comments, or want us to talk about other topics of interest for you, please make sure you reach out and leave those for us. We're more than happy to discuss any of the topics that you might have desire to learn more about. Stay tuned for more talks and more discussions on various aspects of human health, hopefully trying to dispel a lot of the misconceptions and disinformation that we get bombarded with on a daily basis.